Welcome back to my channel. Tonight, you and I will step into the shadows together. In this episode, we'll listen to terrifying stories too disturbing for the daylight. True encounters whispered from places the world forgot. If you love horror that lingers long after the video ends, make sure to subscribe, give this video a like, and turn on the bell, so you never miss when the darkness calls again. I need you to understand something before I start. I'm not the kind of guy who scares easy. I've worked nights in factories, sat through empty warehouses with nothing but a flashlight and my thermos, and even pulled shifts at truck depots where rats outnumbered people. Work is work. That's what I always told myself. So when a temp agency called offering a 3-week contract as a night security guard at the old Riverside Psychiatric Hospital, I said yes, without hesitation. The pay was decent, and they made it sound boring in the best possible way. Sit in a booth, check the occasional door, and keep vandals out. Easy. The hospital had been closed for over 30 years. They said the building was being evaluated for redevelopment, and until inspectors signed off, they needed someone to make sure no kids broke in and set fires. The guy at the agency laughed when he told me the job was mostly babysitting concrete. Still, the first time I drove up the cracked driveway, I felt something tighten in my chest. The place was huge, an endless brick facade with boarded windows, its roofline jagged where pieces had collapsed. The main entrance had iron doors chained shut, but that didn't stop wind from whistling through cracks in the masonry. Even from the parking lot I could smell it, that thick, stagnant scent of rot and dust that only abandoned buildings carry. My station was a prefab trailer on the edge of the lot. It had a desk, a radio, and a binder full of instructions. Nothing complicated. Patrol twice a night, check the exterior doors, and note anything suspicious. They didn't want me inside the hospital unless absolutely necessary. That was fine by me. But on my second night, I noticed something strange. It was just after 2 a.m. I was doing a perimeter walk, flashlight in hand, crunching over broken glass and weeds. That's when I heard it, a sharp metallic clang echoing from somewhere deep inside. At first, I thought it was the wind knocking loose pipes, but it didn't repeat like a rattle. It came again, deliberate this time. A door shutting. I froze at the base of the old surgical wing. The sound had come from behind those boarded windows. I told myself it was probably vandals. Kids dared each other to break in all the time. Hell, I'd done the same when I was a teenager. So I radioed it in, voice shaking more than I'd like to admit, and waited for backup. The dispatcher told me nobody else was on shift. It was just me. I took a deep breath, pulled out the master keys they'd given me, and went to the service entrance. The smell hit me first, like mold and something metallic, faint but sharp, almost like pennies rubbed between your fingers. My flashlight cut through the dust, showing graffiti, fallen ceiling tiles, and wheelchairs rusting in corners. I told myself I'd just do a quick sweep, make sure no one was squatting, then get the hell back out. The sound came again. This time, it was footsteps. I swept the beam of light down the hall, long corridor peeling paint, shadows stretching forever. Empty. "Security," I called out, trying to sound tough. My voice bounced back at me, warped and hollow. Then clear as day, I heard it. A voice. It wasn't words I understood. It was soft, like someone humming under their breath. High-pitched, childlike. I should have left right then, but something about it pulled me deeper. I followed the sound past abandoned wards, past doors with shattered glass windows. Every step echoed like I was walking inside a drum. Finally, I reached a door marked Pediatric Isolation Unit. The humming was louder now. I raised my flashlight. On the other side of the glass, smeared across the dusty window, was a small handprint. It was fresh. That was the moment I realized whatever was inside this hospital wasn't trapped in the past. It was awake, and it knew I was there. I didn't touch the door. I swear to God, I didn't. The handprint on the glass was enough to lock every muscle in my body. I just stood there, frozen, my flashlight trembling in my hand. I tried to explain it away. Maybe some explorer had gotten in earlier. Maybe the print was old and the dust hadn't settled yet. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had walked this hall less than 24 hours ago during my first shift, and the glass had been perfectly clear. Something was in there. Something small. Something alive. I backed away, step by step, forcing my breathing to stay steady. I didn't want to show whatever was inside that I was afraid. The humming had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse, heavy, expectant. When I turned the corner to head back toward the service entrance, I realized the air had changed. It was warmer, thicker, like the walls themselves were exhaling on me. And then, from somewhere deeper in the hospital, came a sound I'll never forget. The squeal of rusted wheels. A gurney. The screech echoed down the corridors, closer, then farther, then closer again, like someone was circling. I pressed my back to the wall, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. Finally, I broke into a run. My boots slammed the tile as I bolted for the service door. The echo of the gurney seemed to chase me, metal screaming against stone faster and faster, until I burst into the night air, gasping. I slammed the door shut and locked it. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the keys. Back in the trailer, I sat at the desk, staring at the security binder like it could tell me what to do. It didn't say anything about voices. It didn't say anything about gurneys moving on their own. I told myself maybe I imagined it. Maybe the isolation was getting to me. But when I turned to my log sheet, I noticed something chilling. Someone had already written on the line for 2:30 a.m. It wasn't my handwriting, just 3 words. Still here, waiting. I slammed the binder shut and backed away, my pulse hammering in my ears. There was no way anyone had been in the trailer. I'd locked the door, checked it twice. I considered calling the agency, telling them I was done, but pride and paycheck kept me pinned in that chair. I told myself I'd at least finish the night, maybe 2 more shifts, then I'd bail. No way was I going to sound like a coward over the phone. The rest of the night I stayed in the trailer, staring out at the hulking silhouette of the hospital. I didn't sleep. I barely blinked. But the 3rd night broke me. It was just after midnight when the radio on the desk crackled to life. No one had used it all shift. The static hissed, then bled into a voice, a child's voice. "You're late," it whispered. I froze, staring at the radio like it might explode. "Room 13, the voice said. "Come play." Then the static cut out, leaving me in a silence so sharp it felt like glass pressing against my skin. I told myself not to do it. I told myself to sit down, to ride out the shift, to go home in the morning and never come back. But my body moved on its own. I picked up the flashlight, grabbed the keys, and walked straight toward the hospital doors. When I stepped inside, the building greeted me differently this time. No longer abandoned, no longer still. The lights in the main corridor flickered on one by one, guiding me like a runway. At the end of the hall, painted in peeling black letters above a doorway, was the number 13. I thought I was in control when I reached that door, but the truth is, I was already inside their game. The door to room 13 groaned as I pushed it open. My flashlight beam shook against the walls, catching faded paint and scattered debris. It wasn't like the other wards. This one looked almost preserved, as if time hadn't dared to touch it. Rows of small beds lined the walls, each with rusted frames and shredded mattresses. Some still had restraints hanging from the rails, the leather stiff with age. I tried not to look at them too long, and then I noticed something impossible. Every bed had a shape in it. Not bodies, at least, not fully formed. Just indentations, like someone invisible was lying there, pressing down the sheets that had rotted decades ago. The air carried that same metallic tang I'd smelled before, stronger now, thick enough to sting my nose. My flashlight flickered. For a split second, I thought I saw children. Dozens of them. Pale faces turned toward me, eyes hollow, mouths open in soundless screams. When the light steadied, the beds were empty again. "Come play," a voice whispered. This time it wasn't through the radio. It was right behind me. I spun, the beam landing on the doorway. Empty. But when I turned back, I realized every indentation in the beds had changed. They weren't lying flat anymore. They were sitting up. I bolted. My boots hammered against the tiles as I tore down the hall, not even caring where I was going, just away. But the building twisted on me. Corridors that should have led to the exit bent into stairwells I'd never seen. Doors slammed shut on their own, sealing me deeper inside. The hospital wasn't abandoned. It was alive, and it wanted me lost. I reached the central rotunda, gasping for air. The light above flickered weakly, buzzing like an insect. In the center of the floor sat a wheelchair facing away from me. It creaked. Slowly, turning. When it faced me, there was a figure slumped in the seat. Small, child-sized. Its head hung forward, strands of black hair covering its face. One arm dangled off the side, and in its tiny hand, it clutched the radio from my trailer. The static hissed, then bled into that same sing-song voice. "You're the new doctor," it said. "Stay with us." I shook my head violently. "No, no, I'm leaving." My words cracked in the hollow air. The figure lifted its head. Its face wasn't a face at all. It was blurred, shifting, like a photograph smeared in chemicals. Eyes that weren't eyes, mouth stretched wider than bone should allow. And then it screamed. The sound wasn't just loud, it was physical. It slammed into my chest, rattled my teeth, made my vision blur. My flashlight shattered when it hit the floor. Darkness swallowed me. I don't remember how I got out. One moment I was in that rotunda, and the next I was stumbling across the parking lot, falling to my knees under the sick yellow glow of the trailer's light. The hospital was silent behind me, waiting. I quit the job the next morning, left the keys, left the binder, didn't even ask for pay. The agency didn't argue. They probably hear stories like mine more often than they admit. But here's the part I can't explain. Last night, a week after I swore never to go back, I was woken by a sound in my apartment. Static. A faint hum bleeding from the corner of the room. When I turned on the lamp, the radio was sitting on my nightstand. The same one from the hospital. Its dial was cracked, its speaker dented, and through the hiss came that same voice. "Room 13, it whispered. "You're late. I don't work there anymore, but Riverside Psychiatric isn't done with me. It followed me home, and I know it won't stop until I answer that call." I've done a lot of dumb things for content. When you run a small urban exploration channel, you start to feel like every video has to be bigger than the last, scarier, more dangerous, more worth it. That's how we ended up at the abandoned St. Mary's Hospital one night in late fall. There were 4 of us, me, my buddy Tyler, his girlfriend Jess, and our cameraman Ryan. We'd scoped it out earlier in the week. St. Mary's had been closed since the early 1980s after a string of scandals, illegal surgeries, under-the-table patient experiments, stuff locals whispered about but never fully confirmed. By the time we came around, the place was just another broken skeleton of a building on the edge of town. The plan was simple. Sneak in through a broken window, film a walkthrough of the wards, maybe get some creepy B-roll of the surgical theaters, then leave before anyone called the cops. Nothing new. We'd done similar places a dozen times, but the second I set foot inside, I knew St. Mary's was different. The air was cold, colder than it should have been for a sealed-up building. My breath fogged instantly. The walls dripped with condensation, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. The smell wasn't just mold, it was chemical, sharp, like formaldehyde and rust. Ryan whispered behind the camera, "Smells like a morgue." I laughed it off, but my stomach knotted. We moved through corridors littered with broken gurneys and shattered glass. The graffiti wasn't the usual spray-painted tags. It was darker. Scrawled phrases like, "Don't look at them," and "Not dead yet." Someone had even painted crude eyes across the walls, dozens of them, all staring. When we reached the basement stairs, I wanted to turn back. They were slick with black water, the air sinking colder the further down we went. But Tyler insisted. Basements are always the creepiest, best for views. He grinned like a kid about to ride a roller coaster. At the bottom was a heavy steel door with chipped white paint. Across it, faded in block letters, was one word: morgue. We looked at each other. Jackpot. Tyler pushed the door, and to our surprise, it opened without resistance. The air that hit us was like walking into a freezer, so cold it burned my lungs. My flashlight beam caught rows of metal drawers lining the walls, each one with a tarnished handle. Most were hanging open, empty, but the smell of decay lingered. And then Jess said something that made my skin crawl. "Why are the lights on?" I looked up. She was right. The overhead fluorescents flickered to life, buzzing faintly. There was no power in the rest of the hospital. We'd checked. But down here, the morgue was glowing with a sickly greenish-white light, like it had never been abandoned. Ryan kept filming, whispering, "Dude, this is insane." But my instincts screamed at me to get out. Nothing about this was right. That's when one of the drawers slammed shut on its own. The metallic clang rang through the morgue, bouncing off the walls. Tyler jumped back, laughing nervously, but Jess grabbed his arm. "Stop," she hissed. "Don't mess with it." But Tyler was always the showman. He walked straight to the closed drawer, grinning at Ryan's camera. "Bet it's just rats," he said. He grabbed the handle and yanked it open. Empty. He turned back to us, about to make a joke, when another drawer across the room slid open by itself, and then another, and another. One by one, the morgue began to wake up, drawers rattling, metal groaning, until half of them stood gaping like open mouths. The buzzing lights flickered harder. The smell of rot thickened, filling my throat with bile. I whispered, "We need to go, now." But before anyone moved, Ryan's camera light caught something, a hand, pale, thin, crawling out of one of the drawers. That's when I realized St. Mary's wasn't empty, the morgue was still in use. The hand was pale as wax, the fingers impossibly thin, each tipped with yellowed nails that scraped the drawer's edge as it dragged itself forward. Jess screamed. Tyler swore under his breath but didn't run. He just stood there, frozen between terror and denial. The drawer groaned louder, sliding fully open. What emerged wasn't a body. Not exactly. It looked like one at first glance, gaunt, wrapped in something that might once have been a hospital sheet, but its movements were wrong, jerky, puppeted. It rolled off the drawer, hitting the floor with a wet smack. Bones shouldn't bend like that, but it pushed itself upright anyway, head lolling to the side. Its mouth opened, and instead of a scream, there was only a wet rattle, like air forcing through waterlogged lungs. Ryan's camera whirred, the red light blinking as he whispered, "Jesus Christ, are you filming this?" I wanted to smack him. Of course he was filming. That's what we always did. Until now, when I realized filming wasn't proof anymore. It was bait. The figure lurched forward. Behind it, more drawers banged open, one after another, a rising chorus of metal and groaning air. Shapes started to slide out, dozens of them. Jess bolted for the stairs. Tyler shouted her name and chased after her. Ryan kept filming, backpedaling, his camera shaking so badly I doubt the footage made any sense. I stayed rooted in place, hypnotized by the impossible. The morgue lights buzzed overhead, flickering in a rhythm almost like breathing. Each time they flared, I saw more figures rising from the drawers, some still tangled in sheets, some naked, skin gray and stretched, some missing pieces, all of them moving toward us. Finally, Survival instinct kicked in. I ran. The stairwell echoed with our footsteps, Jess sobbing, Tyler yelling, Ryan cursing every time he stumbled. I could hear the scraping behind us, the sound of bare feet dragging tile, of dozens of bodies forcing themselves up the stairs that had long been left to rot. When we reached the first landing, the overhead bulb flickered on by itself, then the next. The hospital wasn't abandoned anymore. It was awake, every hallway lighting up to guide its children. Jess tripped on broken concrete, and Tyler grabbed her, pulling her up by the arm. For a second, I thought we might make it. The front entrance was only 2 hallways away. Then Ryan stopped. He was still filming. The idiot had turned around, camera fixed on the stairwell as the first of the figures pulled itself into view. "Don't just stand there," I yelled. But he didn't move. He whispered, "They're looking at me." And he was right. The figures didn't look at Jess or Tyler or me. Every sunken eye socket, every ruined face was turned straight at Ryan. He dropped the camera. It clattered against the floor, still recording, as he stumbled backward, hands clawing at his head. "Stop! Get out of my head!" His voice rose into a scream. Tyler grabbed his arm, tried to drag him, but Ryan jerked away. He bolted down the opposite hall, deeper into the hospital, the shadows swallowing him. We didn't chase him. We couldn't. The shapes were spilling into the corridor now, blocking the way. Jess sobbed, "We can't leave him." Tyler grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him. "We have to. He's gone." His voice broke when he said it. We ran, but the sound of drawers slamming and bodies dragging never stopped. Every corner, every hall, the morgue followed us. By the time we burst through a side door into the freezing night, I couldn't tell if the screams echoing inside belonged to Ryan or something else entirely. And even as we ran into the dark, I knew it wasn't over, because the morgue doesn't let its chosen go. We didn't stop running until the hospital was a shrinking shadow behind us. Our lungs burned, our legs shook, but even then Jess kept glancing back, convinced the pale figures were still following. They weren't. At least, not in the way you'd expect. The morgue doesn't need to chase. It finds other ways to claim you. We made it back to the car. Tyler fumbled the keys, cursing, hands shaking so badly he could barely unlock the doors. Jess climbed into the back seat, sobbing into her palms. I sat in the passenger side, heart hammering. We should have left right then. But Tyler wouldn't start the engine. He just sat there, staring through the windshield at the black windows of St. Mary's. "Ryan's still in there," he whispered. I swallowed. "You saw what happened. We can't go back." But Tyler slammed the steering wheel. "He's my best friend." The silence that followed was heavier than the night around us. Then, faintly, we all heard it. The sound of static. I turned. Jess had Ryan's camera in her lap. The red light was still blinking, battery somehow alive. She hit play. The screen lit up, shaky footage of the morgue. Ryan's voice came through, ragged, terrified. "They're looking at me!" Then the camera fell, pointing at the floor. But what we saw next wasn't what had happened. The footage kept going. Past the moment we left him, past the stairwell, into the morgue again. It showed Ryan being dragged back inside, not by us, not by any human hand, but by dozens of pale arms reaching out from the drawers. His screams cut off as the doors slammed shut. Jess dropped the camera, gagging. The screen cracked, but the video kept looping, Ryan's last moments playing over and over. Tyler started the car then. We tore out of the lot, gravel spitting under the tires. None of us spoke. The camera sat on the floor, screen glowing like an open wound. We didn't sleep that night. We didn't talk much either. By morning, Jess swore she heard knocking from inside the trunk. Tyler brushed it off, but I noticed the way his hands trembled when he lit his 3rd cigarette in an hour. We tried to move on. We told ourselves Ryan had just disappeared. That's what we told the cops when they asked. He split off. We couldn't find him. The hospital swallowed him like it swallowed everyone else. But St. Mary's didn't forget us. 2 weeks later, Jess stopped answering her phone. Tyler went to check on her apartment. He found the door unlocked, the lights buzzing overhead. On her kitchen table was Ryan's cracked camera, still playing the same loop. Jess was nowhere. No signs of struggle, no blood, no body. Just gone. Tyler showed up at my place that night, pale and shaking. He swore he heard Jess's voice calling his name from the camera's speakers. He begged me to come back with him, to go to St. Mary's and end it somehow. I said no. I told him we'd both die if we went back. He left anyway. That was 3 nights ago. He hasn't come back. Now it's just me. Me and this camera. It's sitting across the room right now, screen glowing even though I never touched it. The video has changed again. It isn't Ryan anymore. It isn't Jess. It isn't Tyler. It's me. I'm watching myself walk back into the morgue, flashlight shaking, whispering, "Why are the lights still on?" If you're hearing this, if you ever see those lights flicker on in St. Mary's basement, don't go inside. The morgue is always looking for more. I've always been drawn to local history. Not the kind you find in glossy brochures or curated museums, the hidden kind. The kind people whisper about at bars or old-timers mention with a grim shake of the head. That's why I was collecting oral accounts of forgotten buildings in my town, old factories, train depots, schools long since burned down. But the one place everyone refused to talk about was the Children's Hospital on Pine Hill. It had been closed for decades, shut down after a mysterious outbreak in the late 1960s. Records were sparse, rumors plentiful. Some said it was neglect, others whispered about experiments. Either way, the hospital had been sealed, padlocked, and left to rot. Naturally, that made it the place I had to see for myself. I told myself it was research, that I'd find artifacts, maybe old records, something to bring the past to light. But really? I think part of me just wanted to prove the town wrong, to walk where they were too afraid to tread. The building loomed at the top of the hill, brickwork crumbling, windows gaping like missing teeth. The front gate was chained, but rusted enough that it gave with one good kick. I carried only a notebook, a penlight, and my old tape recorder. No camera. I wanted this to feel real, unfiltered. Inside, the air was thick, like breathing through a damp cloth. Hallways stretched in every direction, peeling paint hanging in sheets. Faded murals of clowns and animals lined the walls, their smiles distorted by decay. I clicked on my recorder. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the vast silence. Entry 1, Pine Hill Children's Hospital. Date, October 14th. Beginning initial walkthrough. The wards were eerily intact. Beds still lined up, sheets stiff with age, teddy bears mummified in dust. I scribbled notes, describing the smell, formaldehyde, mildew, something faintly sweet underneath. I didn't want to name it, but I knew it. Rot. Then I noticed something odd. One of the rooms wasn't empty. At first, I thought it was a mannequin. A small figure sat upright on a bed, legs dangling, head tilted. My penlight flickered across pale skin stretched tight over sharp bones. A child. I froze. It wasn't possible. No one could have survived here. No one should have been here. Hello? My voice cracked. The figure didn't move. For a long moment I thought I really was looking at a doll. But then its chest rose, barely. Shallow, trembling breaths. I stepped closer, heart hammering. The child's eyes were open, milky but aware, locked on me. His lips moved. I leaned down, straining to hear. Never discharged. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the recorder. The boy's voice was a whisper, raw, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. His gaze never left mine. Entry 2, I stammered into the recorder. I've found, there's a patient. Alive. Repeat. A living patient. But as soon as I said it, the building groaned. A deep, resonant creak, like the walls themselves objected. The lights overhead flickered, not fully dead after all, just enough to pulse once, twice, like a heartbeat. The child's mouth stretched into the faintest smile. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. My penlight died. The hallway outside erupted with the sound of running feet, not one set, dozens. I spun, the recorder shaking in my hand, but the corridor was empty, just the echo of children's laughter bouncing off the peeling walls. That was the moment I realized Pine Hill wasn't abandoned. It was waiting for me. The laughter echoed long after the hallway had gone silent again. It wasn't playful. It was sharp, brittle, like glass rattling in a jar. My recorder picked up nothing but static, though I swear I heard it clear as day. I forced myself to look back at the boy. He hadn't moved, still sitting upright, still staring. Lips stretched into that thin smile. But there was something different now. His skin seemed paler, thinner, almost translucent in the glow of the failing emergency lights. Veins mapped across him like spider webs. "What happened here?" I asked, though I don't know why. Maybe I thought I could treat this like an interview, keep it academic. The boy tilted his head, bones popping in his neck. "We stayed," he whispered. "We stayed when they left." I swallowed hard. "Who's we?" He didn't answer. Instead, his eyes flicked toward the hallway. That's when I saw them, shapes moving in the dark, small hunched figures peering from behind door frames. Dozens of them, all children, or what used to be children. Their eyes glowed faintly, catching the dim light, and their faces were slack, open-mouthed, like puppets waiting for strings. I backed toward the doorway, recorder still clutched in my hand. "This isn't real," I whispered. "This can't be real." The boy on the bed chuckled softly, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Real enough. Real forever." The shapes started to move closer. Their footsteps were light, but together they sounded like rain against glass. My penlight flickered once, then went out completely, plunging me into darkness. I bolted. The corridors twisted on themselves, every turn leading me deeper into the hospital instead of out. Murals of smiling animals warped in my flashlight's dying glow, teeth too sharp, eyes too wide. Each time I thought I found the exit, I'd push open a door only to find another ward, rows of tiny beds, sheets pulled tight, and those faint depressions in the mattresses, as though something had only just gotten up, and always, behind me, the patter of footsteps. I ducked into what looked like an old records room, slamming the door shut. Papers littered the floor, yellow and brittle. I clawed through them, desperate for something, anything to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when I found it. A file, marked in faded ink. Patient number 1001. I opened it with trembling hands. The photo clipped inside was of the boy on the bed. Same sharp cheekbones, same pale eyes. But the date on the file made no sense, 1964. According to the notes, he had been admitted for treatment of uncurable condition. Discharge date, blank. Below that, in frantic handwriting, someone had scrawled, "Refuses to die. Contagion spreads. Do not interact." My heart lurched. The sound of footsteps pressed against the door now, dozens of tiny palms slapping the wood. The knob rattled. And then, over the noise, I heard his voice, calm, patient. "You found me," he said. I dropped the file. When I turned, the boy was sitting in the corner of the records room, though I hadn't seen him enter. His head tilted, lips curled in that same thin smile. "You're writing it down," he whispered. His gaze flicked to the recorder in my hand. "Good. That way they'll remember." My breath caught. Remember what? The door burst inward and the room flooded with children, pale, hollow-eyed, reaching for me with hands that felt too cold, too real. That was the moment I understood. I wasn't just researching history, I was becoming part of it. They rushed me all at once. Cold hands grasped my arms, my legs pulling me to the floor. Their weight wasn't much, but there were too many of them. My recorder clattered across the tiles, still hissing faintly, picking up every ragged breath. I thrashed, kicked, shouted, but the children didn't make a sound. Not a cry, not a laugh, just silence, broken only by the creak of their joints as they climbed over me. Then the boy spoke. "Shh," he whispered, kneeling beside me. His face hovered inches from mine, milky eyes glinting. "You're scaring them. They don't like loud noises." I stopped struggling, chest heaving. The children froze with me, heads cocked at unnatural angles, waiting. "What do you want?" I croaked. The boy smiled. "We want what you came here for. We want to be remembered." I didn't understand, not at first. But then he reached into the pile of papers strewn across the floor, pulled out a medical file, and pressed it against my chest. "Write it down," he said. "Tell our story. You're the new historian." The other children began to murmur then, voices soft and layered, like whispers bleeding through a radio. They spoke names, dates, treatments, all of them patients, all of them forgotten. I shook my head violently. "No, I'm not, I can't." The boy's smile widened. "You can, you already are." And then I felt it. The weight on my chest shifted, not physical but inside, memories that weren't mine. Cold hallways, endless tests, needles piercing skin, screams muffled by locked doors, starvation, fever, the slow crawl of death that never quite came. Images slammed into my skull, sharp and suffocating, until I couldn't tell which were theirs and which were mine. I staggered to my feet, the children parting to let me rise. My legs trembled, my breath ragged. I grabbed the recorder off the floor and stared at it, horrified, because it wasn't empty. The tape was full. Pages of notes in my own voice, naming every patient, describing every experiment. Hours of recordings, though I'd only been inside the hospital for minutes. I pressed stop, and the hiss of static filled the air. Beneath it, faintly, was the sound of children laughing. When I looked up, the boy was gone. So were the others. The room stood empty, silent, dust motes drifting in the beam of my dead flashlight. I stumbled out into the hall, desperate for an exit. This time, the hospital didn't resist. The corridors opened easily, guiding me to the front doors. I didn't question it, I just ran. By the time I reached the gate, dawn was breaking over Pine Hill. The hospital behind me loomed in the pale light, its windows black, its walls still. I told myself never to go back. I burned the notes I'd scribbled. I smashed the recorder. I thought that would be enough. It wasn't. Because even now, when I close my eyes, I see them. Rows of children staring from their beds, mouths open, whispering names I shouldn't know. I dream of their stories, their treatments, their endless suffering. And when I wake, the words are carved into my memory as though I lived them. I thought I was researching history, but history is researching me. And the truth? I was never just a visitor in Pine Hill Children's Hospital. I was the last patient all along. The townspeople were right to fear the hospital, but not because it held ghosts, because it still writes its history. And now I'm part of it. I've worked demolition and salvage for almost 15 years. Old malls, schools, warehouses, you name it, I've gutted it. But hospitals? They're the worst. Something about tearing apart places where people suffered never sits right. Still, work is work. And when the company sent me to start stripping copper wiring from the abandoned East Ridge surgical wing, I didn't hesitate. Copper sells, the boss pays, and I needed the hours. The wing had been shuttered in the late 70s after a fire. From the outside, it looked like every other condemned building. Boarded windows, graffiti, weeds clawing up the bricks. Inside, though, inside it felt wrong. The air smelled burnt, even decades later. Smoke had stained the ceiling, black veins spreading across every surface. Dust coated everything, but under the dust lay surgical instruments, tables, carts. Like the doctors had just walked away mid-operation and never returned. I set up my tools, clipped on a headlamp, and got to work. First hour was easy. Pop open panels, pull the wire, coil it. The silence helped me focus. But around 11 p.m., as I yanked another bundle from the wall, I heard it. Voices. At first, I thought it was a radio left behind, maybe some squatters upstairs. The sound was faint, crackling, distorted, like intercom chatter bleeding through walls. I froze, holding my breath. The words weren't clear, but the tone was unmistakable. Calm, clinical. Doctors. Scalpel. Hold pressure. I shook it off. Probably my imagination. I'd been in enough asbestos-filled ruins to know your mind plays tricks. But when I turned my headlamp down the corridor, I saw something that made me doubt everything. The red light above the operating theater flickered on. I hadn't touched a breaker. The whole building was supposed to be dead. Yet that light glowed steady, marking the room as in use. Against my better judgment, I crept closer. The double doors were ajar, hinges screaming when I nudged them open. What I saw inside nearly made me drop my tools. The operating theater wasn't abandoned, at least not in the way it should have been. The overhead surgical lights buzzed to life, bathing the room in a cold white glow. A table sat in the center, spotless, stainless steel gleaming. Instruments were laid out in perfect order, scalpels, clamps, bone saws, not rusted, not dusty. Sharp, clean, and then, clear as day, I heard them. Patient prepped, begin incision. The voices came from nowhere and everywhere, circling the room, overlapping in sterile rhythm. I spun. Headlamp slicing through empty air, but no one was there. Then the smell hit me. Not dust, not smoke. Blood, fresh and coppery, filling my nostrils until I gagged. I stumbled backward, dropping a spool of wire that clattered across the tiles. The voices stopped, and in the silence that followed, something new joined the room. Breathing. Slow. Labored. Right beside the operating table. My headlamp beam shook across the table surface and landed on an outline, a body, covered by a sheet. The fabric rose and fell with each breath. I swear on my life it wasn't there before. I should have run then, but when the sheet began to move, curiosity held me still, and that's when the real operation started. The sheet rose and fell, steady like someone asleep. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my headlamp. "No," I whispered to myself. "This isn't real. This place is dead." But the voices came back, crisp and commanding now, not whispers, not echoes, orders. Scalpel. Clamp. Retract. Each word bounced off the walls, clinical, precise. I couldn't see anyone, but the instruments on the tray rattled as if invisible hands were lifting them. The scalpel glinted under the surgical light, then hovered, poised above the sheet. I staggered back, breath ragged. My boot hit the dropped spool of copper wire. The sound clanged across the tiles, and suddenly the sheet twitched. A hand shot out from beneath it, thin, gray. Skin stretched tight over bone. It groped blindly, nails scratching metal. The voices overlapped louder, faster, as though panicked by my presence. Hold pressure. Vitals dropping. Continue. The sheet slipped back, revealing a face, or what was left of one. Hollow sockets stared at me where eyes should have been. Its jaw opened wide, tongue blackened, a guttural wheeze escaping its throat. I bolted. The operating theater doors slammed shut behind me on their own, nearly catching my heel. I sprinted down the corridor, headlamp beam jerking wildly. The air grew hotter with each step, the stench of cauterized flesh filling my nose. And then, footsteps. Not just one set, dozens. I turned a corner and froze. The hallway ahead was full. Figures in tattered scrubs stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces obscured by cracked surgical masks. Some held rusted tools, others clutched clipboards, stained dark. Every single one of them turned their heads toward me in unison. I spun and ran the other way. But the corridor behind me was already filling too. More figures, gloved hands twitching, scalpels gleaming. The voices rose into a cacophony. Prep the patient. Incision required. Don't let him leave. I ducked into a side room, slamming the door shut and shoving a filing cabinet in front of it. My chest heaved as I tried to steady my breathing. The room was small, lined with shelves of dusty jars. I shone my headlamp on them and almost screamed. Inside the jars weren't organs, not exactly. They were pieces, fingers, eyes, strips of skin, preserved in yellowed liquid, some pressed against the glass as if they wanted out. My light flickered. For a moment, I saw my own reflection in the glass jars, but not as I was. My reflection wore a surgical mask, eyes hollow, gloves dripping red. The door behind me rattled. Fists pounded the wood, each strike stronger, the cabinet screeching across the floor. And then I heard it again. Breathing. But this time, it wasn't from the hallway. It was inside the room with me. I swung the light across the shelves. At the far end, slumped in the corner, was another body under a sheet. The fabric rose with each breath. Slowly. Patiently. I backed away, heart hammering. The jars rattled on the shelves, liquid sloshing. The pounding at the door stopped. Silence pressed in, heavy and deliberate. The sheet shifted. A hand pressed against the inside, pushing upward like it was about to sit up. And then, from under the fabric, a voice rasped. "Doctor?" I thought I was the intruder in that hospital, but the moment it called me doctor, I knew they had chosen me for the next procedure. Doctor. The word slithered out from under the sheet, fragile yet commanding. My chest tightened. I wanted to deny it, scream that I wasn't their doctor, that I didn't belong here, but the air in that room left no space for denial. The pounding on the door stopped. Absolute silence fell, thick as gauze. Then, slowly, the sheet slid down. The figure underneath sat up, joints popping like dry wood snapping. Its face was shrouded by cracked surgical gauze wrapped tight around its skull. Only the mouth was exposed, a jagged line of teeth clamped together, lips blackened with rot. It raised one trembling hand and pointed directly at me. The voices came back at once, dozens of them, circling the room like a storm. "Doctor has arrived. Begin the procedure. Prep the patient." My knees buckled. I backed against the jars, glass clinking as the preserved pieces inside writhed against their containers. "I'm not—" My voice broke. "I'm not a doctor." But they didn't hear me, or maybe they did, and they didn't care. The door slammed open, sending the cabinet crashing aside. Figures in scrubs poured in, masks cracked and faces sagging like wax. They moved with mechanical precision, gloved hands gripping my arms, my shoulders dragging me forward. I fought. God, I fought. I kicked. I screamed. I tried to wrench free, but their grip was iron, cold, and unyielding. They didn't speak to me. They spoke over me. "Scalpel ready. Anesthesia unnecessary. Secure restraints." The sheeted figure slid off the corner bed, bones cracking as it shuffled upright. It shuffled to the operating table in the center of the room, climbed onto it, and lay flat. Then it turned its veiled head toward me. "You'll finish what they started." My back slammed against cold steel. Leather restraints snapped around my wrists, ankles, chest. I thrashed until my skin burned, but the straps held. The surgical light overhead flared on, blinding me. The faces leaned in, masked, hollow-eyed, scalpels and clamps glinting in their hands. "Prep incision." A sharp sting at my wrist. I jerked my head to see a scalpel slice across my forearm. Not deep, just a line. Blood welled up, dripping onto the tray. One of the figures dipped a gloved finger into it, smearing the red onto the instruments. My scream echoed in the tiled room, bouncing back at me like laughter. Then came the smell, burnt flesh. Something hot pressed against the wound, cauterizing it. My body convulsed, but the straps held tight. Above me, the sheeted figure whispered, "We were never discharged, and now, neither are you." The voices roared all at once. Cut deeper. Extract. Replace. Pain bloomed across my chest as scalpels sliced, clamps pried. I felt every tug, every snap of sinew. My vision blurred, but I stayed awake. They wanted me awake. Through the agony, I realized something horrific. They weren't dissecting me. They were reconstructing me. Piece by piece, fingers from the jars pressed against my skin, stitching themselves into place. Eyes I didn't recognize were forced into sockets. My blood pumped faster, but it wasn't all mine anymore. The voices quieted then, almost reverent. Procedure complete. Doctor preserved. The restraints loosened. The figures stepped back, waiting. I staggered upright, my body trembling. My hands weren't my hands anymore. My eyes burned with sights that weren't mine. I caught my reflection in a jar's glass, a mask over my face, stitches crawling across my skin, eyes that belonged to a dozen others. And then the voices whispered, all in unison, "Now, continue the work." I wasn't hired to strip copper. I was chosen to become part of their staff. And the worst part? When I hold a scalpel now, my hands know exactly what to do. When my grandfather died, my family went through his belongings the way people always do, slowly, carefully, with that mix of grief and exhaustion that makes every box feel heavier than it is. Most of it was ordinary, photo albums, old tools, yellowed newspapers. But at the bottom of a trunk in his attic, I found something that didn't belong, a file folder. Stamped across the front, in faded ink, was the name of a hospital I'd only heard whispered about, Fairview Asylum. It had been shut down decades before I was born, its history wiped clean. People in town said the records were sealed, destroyed, or buried in some archive. But here, in my hands, was proof my grandfather had been a patient there. I shouldn't have opened it. The file was thin, but its contents made my stomach churn. Admission forms. Doctor's notes written in cramped, slanted handwriting. Words like uncooperative and delusional. And one more thing, a discharge form, or rather, the absence of one. His file just ended. Except I knew my grandfather. He'd lived a full life, married, raised kids, worked at the mill. Whatever happened in that hospital, it hadn't stopped him. Or at least, that's what I thought. The last page of the file had something scribbled on the back in his own handwriting. Faint but legible. They let me out, but I never left. I should have closed it. I should have burned it, but I couldn't. Curiosity had me by the throat. The hospital ruins weren't far. Just a drive across the county, up a road no one used anymore. I told myself I was going for answers, for closure. That's what I still tell myself, though now I know it was something else. Something that wanted me there. Fairview sat like a carcass on the hillside, its brick shell collapsing, windows jagged as broken teeth. Nature had grown over most of it, ivy choking the walls, but the gates still stood, rusted and half open, like they were waiting. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. Dust hung in the shafts of light like ash. I followed signs through hallways where paint peeled like scabs. Each door was labeled, wards AE, hydrotherapy, records. I don't know why, but I went straight to the records wing. The file had started this, and I needed to know what else it was hiding. The records room was a ruin, shelves collapsed, papers strewn and rotted. But in the corner, a cabinet stood upright, untouched. Its drawers were sealed with heavy locks, all of them rusted shut. Except one. The top drawer slid open easily, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside were neat folders, crisp despite the years. I flipped through them, heart pounding, until I found it. My grandfather's file. But it wasn't the same one I'd taken from the attic. This one was thicker. Dozens of pages, and it didn't end where mine had. The later entries were dated after he'd come home. Notes about outpatient observation, reports of hallucinations persisting. One page even mentioned me by name, though I hadn't even been born yet. The last entry chilled me to my core. Subject's bloodline shows signs of continuation. Recommend monitoring descendants. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, dragging, coming from deeper in the record's wing. I turned, every hair on my neck bristling. The hallway outside was empty, but on the file's final page, fresh ink glistened in neat handwriting. Patient's descendant has arrived. Continue observation. That was the moment I realized. My grandfather hadn't just left something behind in Fairview. He'd left it waiting for me. I stuffed the file back into the drawer, heart racing. The ink was still wet. I could smell it, sharp and chemical. I wiped my hand on my jeans, terrified it might smear onto me. The footsteps echoed again, heavier this time. Whoever, or whatever, was in that hallway wasn't trying to be quiet. I killed my flashlight and pressed against the cabinet, holding my breath. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, soft and deliberate, came the sound of a hand sliding along the wall outside. Nails scratching against plaster. I swallowed hard. My mind kept circling back to the file, the words written about me before I was born. How could that be possible? How could records that old know my name? The scratching stopped. I risked peeking around the doorframe. The hall was empty. Dust hung in the still air. I should have left right then, but curiosity, that same pull that brought me here in the first place, kept me moving. I needed to see more. I needed proof I wasn't losing my mind. I crept through the hospital, past collapsed ceilings and warped door frames. Every room looked abandoned in the way you'd expect. Broken equipment, rusted beds, paint peeling like dead skin. But sometimes, just for a second, I'd glimpse something else. A bed perfectly made. A light flickering on in the corner. A clipboard sitting neatly on a desk, as if a doctor had only just stepped away. It was like the hospital was trying to remind me of how it used to be, and that some part of it never stopped. I ended up in Ward C. Rows of beds stretched out. Some with restraints still dangling from the rails. Dust coated everything except one bed. That one was clean. Sheets tucked tight. Pillow fluffed. Waiting. And on the blanket, sitting dead center, was a manila folder. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top, in bold, was my name. Below it, admission date, today. I stumbled back, the folder slipping from my fingers. My chest tightened. That's when I heard a voice. You found it. I spun, flashlight snapping on. In the far corner of the ward stood a man in a hospital gown. His skin was pale, his hair thin and gray. He looked like my grandfather, at least the way I remembered him in his last years. But his eyes were wrong, too sharp, too knowing. Grandpa? My voice cracked. He smiled faintly. They let me out, but I never left. I froze, words catching in my throat. He stepped forward, bare feet dragging across the tiles. They said it would end with me, he continued, voice calm, almost gentle. But it doesn't. It never does. Bloodline means continuity. The air grew colder, my breath fogging. I backed away until my spine hit the wall. You're not him, I whispered. The smile widened. I'm what they made me. What they'll make you. I blinked, and he was gone. The ward was empty again. The folder lay at my feet, the page inside rustling, though there was no breeze. When I picked it up, New words had appeared beneath my admission date. Condition, pending. That was when I realized my grandfather hadn't escaped Fairview. He'd just been keeping my place warm. The folder shook in my hands. My name, my admission date. Condition, pending. The ink looked wet, as if it had been written while I was standing there. I wanted to tear it up, burn it, anything, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was fascination. Either way, I tucked it under my arm and stumbled out of the ward. The hospital seemed different now. The air was thicker, corridors stretching longer than they had before. Lights flickered on and off, guiding me deeper instead of out. My grandfather's voice echoed faintly. "They'll make you." I found myself back in the records wing without meaning to. The file drawers rattled, shaking violently as if dozens of hands were trapped inside. Papers fluttered to the floor, pages filling with ink as I watched, names writing themselves in frantic scrawl. Every one of those names was someone from my family, uncles, aunts, cousins, my mother, even my younger brother. I staggered back, whispering, "No, this can't be real. It's just files." Just paper. But the names glistened wetly, as if carved into the page with something more than ink. The air grew cold. My flashlight flickered, and when it steadied, he was there again. My grandfather, only closer now. He looked stronger, younger than before, his skin tighter, his eyes clearer. He smiled as he stepped toward me, and I realized the folder under my arm was heating up, searing against my skin. "Stop running," he said. His voice was calm, almost kind. "You can't change what you are." "What am I?" I shouted, the words breaking. "What the hell am I?" His smile faded into something sharper. "You're the continuation." The file drawers burst open all at once, papers exploding into the air like a storm of wings. My flashlight died, plunging everything into darkness except the glowing folder pressed against my chest. I ran. I don't remember how I made it out. Only the sound of footsteps pounding behind me, hundreds of them, echoing as though the whole hospital had come alive to chase me. The gates loomed ahead, and then suddenly I was outside, gasping under the night sky. The hospital was silent behind me, its windows dark. I drove home in a daze, folder still clutched in my hands. I should have thrown it out the window. I should have burned it in a ditch. But I didn't. It's here with me now. And that's the problem. Because when I opened it again, the words had changed. My name was still there, but now it said, "Condition in progress." I don't know what that means. I don't know if Fairview followed me home or if I never left. Maybe the hospital is in my bloodline, like he said. Maybe it's just madness running through us like inheritance. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint scratch of pens on paper, filing cabinets sliding open, footsteps in my hallway. I tell myself it's in my head, that I'm imagining it. But last night, when I woke up, the folder was sitting on my nightstand, open to a new page, and on it, written in neat, clinical handwriting, was the name of my brother. Admission date, tomorrow. I don't know if Fairview Asylum is still standing or if it only exists in my family now. All I know is the records keep writing themselves, and sooner or later we all get admitted. I'm a firefighter. 20 years on the job and I thought I'd seen everything. Car wrecks, infernos, collapsed buildings. But nothing prepared me for the night we trained in the old St. Alden's Hospital. The place had been closed since the 1980s after a fire gutted half the upper floors. For years, the city kept it sealed, but budget cuts meant we needed somewhere to run drills, and the chief figured it was as good as any. So, one foggy November evening, we rolled in with gear, axes, and flashlights, ready to practice search and rescue scenarios in the ruins. I should have known something was wrong the second I stepped through the doors. The smell hit me first. Not just the usual dust and mildew of abandoned places, it was smoke. Old smoke baked into the walls, thick enough to sting my nose, and underneath it, something sharper, like meat left too long on a grill. We spread out, 4 of us in my unit, helmets on, lamps cutting through the dark. The building creaked like it was still alive, settling around us. The chief's voice crackled over the radio. "Head to the 3rd floor. Simulate a rescue in the burn unit." I froze when I heard that. Every firefighter knows the stories. The burn unit at St. Alden's had been full the night the fire broke out. Patients who couldn't walk, trapped in their beds as the smoke rolled in. They say none of them made it out. That whole wing became their tomb. We climbed the stairs anyway. By the time we reached the 3rd floor, the air was already warmer. Too warm. Our radios hissed with static, voices fading in and out. My lamp beam shook across blackened walls, charred beams, wheelchairs fused with melted plastic. And then I heard it, screaming. At first I thought it was feedback from the radio. But the others heard it too. The way they froze told me I wasn't imagining it. It was faint, stretched thin, but unmistakable. Human screams, echoing through the halls. We followed the sound down the corridor. The closer we got, the hotter it felt, like stepping into a working fire. My turnout gear clung to me, sweat soaking through. The hallway ended at double doors marked "Burn Unit." The metal handles were twisted, melted by heat decades ago. But when we pushed, the doors swung open like they'd been waiting. Inside was hell frozen in place. Beds lined the room, blackened frames still bolted to the floor, walls bubbled with soot. But the worst part, the sheets, they weren't just burnt, they were fused, melted into the shapes of bodies that had never been pulled out. Jess, the youngest on our team, muttered, "Jesus Christ." That's when the lights flickered on. Every overhead fixture sparked to life, buzzing faintly. The room glowed sickly orange, like it was lit by fire instead of electricity. And the screaming grew louder. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was dozens, layered, overlapping, shrill with agony. The beds trembled. The blackened sheets began to rise and fall, as though something underneath them was still trying to breathe. I dropped my axe. My throat tightened. The screaming wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from inside our helmets. I ripped off my mask to escape the sound, but that's when I realized the fire hadn't ended in St. Alden's. It was still burning and we were standing in the middle of it. The second I tore off my mask, the screaming got sharper, clearer, like it was cutting straight into my skull. My ears rang, my teeth buzzed, every nerve screaming back at the noise. The others yanked their helmets off too, gasping. Their faces were pale under the orange glow. Jess was crying openly, hands clamped to her ears. "It's in the comms," she shouted, but the radios were dead, dangling uselessly at our chests. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside us. The heat rose in waves. My skin prickled like it was blistering, even though no flames touched me. The beds in the burn unit began to shift, the melted sheets heaving as if unseen bodies writhed underneath. The blackened shapes clawed upward, brittle fingers breaking through fabric and ash. "Back out!" I yelled. We bolted for the door, boots pounding against scorched tile. But the hall we'd come through wasn't the same anymore. Smoke rolled toward us, thick and choking, though nothing burned. Through the haze, the walls glowed faintly, pulsing like embers under skin. And in that haze, shadows moved, human shapes, limbs stretched wrong. Faces half melted, eyes blistered shut. They staggered toward us, mouths open in silent screams. I swung my axe at one, the blade cutting through air. The figure dissolved into smoke, then reformed right behind me. Fingers brushed my neck, hot enough to burn through the collar of my coat. Panic took over. We barreled into a stairwell, smoke pouring down after us. Our radios crackled again, this time with voices we didn't recognize. "They left us here. Doctor, don't stop the treatment. It still hurts." The stairwell twisted wrong, spiraling deeper instead of down. Every landing looked the same. Same scorched doors, same melted signs. We weren't escaping. We were circling. Jess collapsed halfway down, coughing blood into her mask. I grabbed her arm, tried to haul her up, but her skin blistered where I touched it. Steam hissed off her gear. She screamed, then went silent. When I looked again, she was gone. Just gone. Her helmet clattered down the steps, empty. The others saw it too. We didn't speak. We couldn't. If we did, we might admit it was real. We pushed through a door on the next landing and stumbled into another ward. This one was worse. The walls dripped with black tar, bubbling like fat on a skillet. The beds weren't empty. They were full. Charred patients writhed, flesh fused to the sheets, mouths opening in unison to shriek with the same endless cry that had chased us from the burn unit. One of the figures lifted its head, skin sloughing from its jaw, and looked right at me. "You're late," it croaked. "The fire's still burning." The others froze. I grabbed their arms, dragged them toward another exit. The door at the far end stood open, glowing with white light. But the closer we got, the hotter the air grew, until I thought my lungs would collapse. The shrieking was everywhere now, filling every corner of my skull. I didn't think. I just ran. When I burst through that door, the light swallowed me whole. For a second, I thought I'd escaped. Then I saw where I was, not outside, not free, back in the burn unit, the same beds, the same sheets. Only this time, one of the blackened shapes was sitting up, and it was wearing Jess's helmet. That's when I realized St. Alden's doesn't let you escape. It just trades places with you until the fire claims enough. Jess's helmet tilted toward me, the blackened figure beneath it twitching as if remembering how to move. I stumbled back, my axe slipping from my hands. "Jess?" I whispered, though I knew better. The thing raised its head. Melted skin cracked as it grinned, teeth glowing white in the firelight. "Still burning," it rasped in her voice. That was enough to break me. I ran. The others weren't far behind, though their footsteps sounded hollow, distant, like they were coming from a different floor entirely. The ward stretched impossibly long, the beds multiplying on either side, every sheet shifted, every shape underneath screaming in unison. We barreled through a side door, down another set of stairs, choking on smoke. My lungs felt raw, my eyes blurred, my skin boiling inside my gear. I knew we couldn't last much longer. At the bottom, we crashed into a boiler room. The old machinery stood twisted and melted, pipes hissing steam. For a moment, I thought we were safe, until the walls began to glow. The brick pulsed red, cracks splitting open to reveal tongues of flame licking outward. From those cracks, voices seeped. "Don't leave us. Stay and burn with us." "You're one of us now," I snapped. "No!" I screamed, my voice raw. "I'm not staying here!" I grabbed a length of pipe from the floor, swung it wildly at the machinery. Sparks flew. Something ruptured. Steam blasted into the room, searing my face, but I didn't stop. I tore at the pipes, smashed at the walls, anything to break through. The heat grew unbearable. My vision tunneled. I felt hands clawing at my back, dragging me toward the glowing cracks. I fought harder, swinging until the pipe bent in my grip. And then, air. A blast of cold hit my face. The wall crumbled outward, and suddenly I was outside, crashing onto frozen ground. I rolled onto my back, coughing, staring up at the night sky. The hospital loomed behind me, its windows black, smoke curling lazily from cracks in the brick, silent. I waited for the others. Minutes passed. No one came. By dawn, I was still alone. The fire chief found me wandering the street, half mad, suit scorched to rags. They said I'd been gone less than an hour, though to me it felt like days. My hands were blistered, my face burned, my voice nearly gone. When I tried to tell them what happened inside, they looked at me with pity. "Smoke inhalation," they said. "Delirium." But I know what I saw, I know the burn unit still screams. And I know I wasn't the only one who heard it. Because last night, as I lay in bed with bandages wrapped around my arms, I heard the faint crackle of my radio on the nightstand. Static hissed, then bled into Jess's voice, ragged and broken. It still hurts. Come back. I threw the radio across the room. But when I picked it up this morning, the dial was scorched black, and the faint smell of smoke still clung to it. I made it out of St. Alden's alive, but surviving isn't victory when part of you never left the fire behind. I'll admit it straight. I wasn't looking for ghosts. I wasn't chasing stories, history, or thrills. I was just looking for a warm place to crash. When you're strung out, abandoned buildings become lifelines. Dry, quiet, forgotten. Nobody kicks you out, nobody asks questions. And in my town, there's no place more forgotten than the old Mercy Detox Ward. It was part of a hospital that shut down in the late 70s. Locals said the detox wing was the last to close, and the stories about it weren't pretty. Patients locked in, forced cold turkey, strapped to beds while doctors experimented with treatments. Most people avoided the place like poison. For me, poison was the point. It was a rainy night when I slipped inside through a broken window. The smell hit me first. Mildew, rust, and something sharper underneath. Alcohol, not the kind you drink, the kind that stings your nose and makes your eyes water. I set up in a corner room, mattress on the floor, needles in my bag. I told myself I'd just ride the night out, maybe catch a buzz, maybe catch some sleep. But the building had other plans. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was withdrawal. A sound, faint at first, metal clinking, like trays being shuffled, instruments laid out. I sat up, heart racing, but the halls were empty. Then came the whispers. Not words I could catch, just soft murmurs slipping through the walls. I pressed my ear to the peeling plaster, and for a moment, I swore I heard someone say, "Another dose." I laughed it off. Stress, paranoia, maybe the drugs already working through my system. But then the smell changed. It wasn't mildew anymore. It was antiseptic, strong, fresh. I walked into the hall, bare feet sticking to the damp tiles. The lights shouldn't have worked. The place had no power. But at the far end of the corridor, a faint glow spilled from under a door. Curiosity, or maybe stupidity, pulled me closer. The door was labeled in faded paint, Treatment Room 4. Inside, the glow came from fluorescent fixtures buzzing weakly overhead. A table stood in the center, stainless steel gleaming as though it had been polished that morning. On it lay dozens of syringes, lined up in perfect rows. Their needles caught the light, sharp and hungry. I should have run. God, I should have. But instead, I stepped closer, staring. The syringes weren't filled with anything I recognized. Some were cloudy white, others dark red, some shimmering green like antifreeze. And then one of them moved. Not rolled, not slipped. Moved, lifted. Floated a few inches off the tray before clattering back down. My chest tightened. I whispered, "Nope. No. No, no." I turned to leave. But the door had closed behind me, and the light flickered once, twice, before steadying. I looked back at the tray. Every single syringe was gone. The table was bare. I backed into the wall, shaking. My mouth went dry, and that's when I felt it. Something cold brushing the inside of my arm. I looked down, and my veins stood out like rivers, pulsing, glowing faintly beneath the skin. A whisper tickled my ear, clear this time. Another dose. That was the moment I realized. I hadn't come to Mercy Detox Ward for shelter. I'd been admitted for treatment. The cold sensation crawled up my arm like liquid ice. My veins glowed faint blue beneath my skin, pulsing in rhythm with my racing heart. I slapped at my arm, desperate to shake the feeling off, but nothing was there. No needle, no hand, just that invisible push under my flesh. I stumbled toward the door, yanking the handle. Locked. I slammed my shoulder against it until my bones ached, but it wouldn't budge. The room hummed around me, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry bees. Then, the tray reappeared. One moment it was empty, the next it was full again, lined with syringes, perfectly ordered. But now, there were more of them. Hundreds. The table sagged under their weight. Some needles dripped. The drops hit the metal with soft taps that echoed louder than gunshots. I pressed myself into the corner, whispering, "It's not real. It's not real." But the whispers in the room grew clearer, surrounding me. Another dose. Higher dosage. Don't fight. My skin burned. I clawed at my arm, nails digging into flesh, until blood welled beneath my fingertips. But the veins only glowed brighter. Like something was pumping through me already. The table rattled. One syringe rose, floating into the air. It turned slowly until its point aimed directly at me. I screamed and kicked the table, sending syringes scattering across the floor. They clattered like bones, rolling into the shadows. For a heartbeat, the room was still. Then they started moving. The needles scraped across the tiles, dragging themselves toward me like insects. Some slid upright, balancing impossibly on their tips, twitching closer, inch by inch. I bolted. I slammed my shoulder into the door again, and this time it burst open. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping, clutching my arm. Behind me, the room went silent, like it had never existed. But the glow under my skin didn't fade. I ran through the corridors, deeper into the hospital. My footsteps echoed off peeling walls, my breath ragged. Every door I passed seemed to hum faintly, whispers leaking through the cracks. Double the dosage. Still resisting. Prepare another injection. Finally, I collapsed against a set of double doors. They were labeled intensive detox. The handles were cold against my palms. I pushed inside. Rows of beds filled the ward, each one occupied. At first I thought they were corpses, patients long forgotten. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized they were alive, or something close to it. Every figure lay strapped down, arms exposed, veins glowing faintly just like mine. Syringes jutted from their flesh at impossible angles, tubing snaking into glass jars filled with liquids that pulsed like heartbeats. Their eyes were open, all of them, staring straight at me. And in unison, they whispered, "Another dose." I staggered backward, bile rising in my throat. My veins burned hotter now, spreading up into my chest, my neck, my vision blurred at the edges. One of the patients turned its head, skin tearing where it stuck to the pillow. Its mouth stretched wide, and in a voice that was both a whisper and a scream, it said, "You belong here." I fell to my knees. The pain in my veins erupted, fire racing through my blood. I clawed at my arms, desperate to rip whatever was inside me out. And when I looked up, the beds were empty. All of them. The straps lay undone. The syringes were gone. Except, now, they were in my hands. A fistful of needles, glistening, their points pressed against my own skin. That was when I realized I wasn't resisting anymore. I was preparing the next dose. The syringes in my hands glistened, tips trembling as though alive. I wanted to drop them, to run until the hospital was nothing but a stain in my memory, but my fingers wouldn't obey. They clenched tighter. The glow in my veins pulsed faster now, spreading across my chest. I stumbled back into the hallway, dizzy, my skin prickling as though 1,000 ants crawled beneath it. Behind me, the whispers gathered strength. Another dose. Repeat the treatment. Don't let it stop. I half ran, half fell through the corridor. Doors blurred on either side. Each time I glanced at one, I saw patients strapped down, arms outstretched, begging me with hollow eyes. My flashlight beam cut across their faces, too pale, too eager. Like they wanted me to finish what had been started. I shoved into the stairwell, hoping for escape. The steps spiraled down endlessly, no landing, no exit. My legs burned, but the stairs didn't change. Every level looked the same, and on every step, more syringes appeared, rolling out of the shadows, clinking underfoot, hurting me downward. By the time I collapsed against the railing, my arms throbbed with heat. I looked down. Fresh puncture marks dotted my skin, dozens. I hadn't felt the needles pierce me, but they had. Each prick glowed faintly, veins branching like roots under my flesh. My stomach turned. That's when I heard it, the shuffle of bare feet. From below, a figure was climbing the stairs. His face was slack, his arms riddled with the same glowing veins. Syringes dangled from him like jewelry, piercing his skin without breaking him. His eyes locked on mine, empty but intent. "You're next," he whispered. I stumbled back up the stairs into the ward again. The glow under my skin pulsed in rhythm with the lights overhead. The hospital wasn't chasing me anymore. It was syncing with me. I was part of it. The hallway opened into treatment room 4, the same room I'd started in. The table was full again, lined with syringes. A new bed sat waiting in the corner, straps neatly laid out. I screamed, hurling the needles in my hands against the wall. They didn't fall. They hovered mid-air, then drifted back to the tray, aligning themselves with a quiet click. The whispers rose in unison, no longer scattered, but a chorus. Begin the cycle. Administer dosage. Repeat. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head. The glow in my veins burned brighter, and for a moment my vision shifted. I wasn't in the room anymore. I was seeing through walls, down corridors, into other wards. And I saw them. Others like me, men, women, drifters, addicts, all holding syringes, all pressing them into waiting arms. Their faces were slack, empty, but their movements were precise, practiced, carriers of the same endless treatment. The vision snapped back, leaving me gasping on the floor. My hand moved on its own, lifting a needle from the tray. I fought it, screaming, but my arm didn't belong to me anymore. The point pressed against my vein. I braced for the sting, but it didn't come. Instead, the door behind me creaked open. A shadow stood in the doorway. Young, skinny, nervous. A kid, no older than 20, shivering in a soaked hoodie. His eyes darted from the tray to me. "Hey," he whispered. "You got anything left?" The needle trembled in my grip. My lips moved before my mind could stop them. Another dose. His eyes lit up with something like hope. He stepped inside, sleeve already rolled back. The door closed softly behind him. I thought the hospital wanted me dead. I was wrong. It wanted me working. And now the cycle continues. One more patient at a time. I work maintenance for the city. My job isn't glamorous, mostly patching leaky pipes, checking power lines, or making sure condemned buildings don't flood and collapse into the street. Places everyone else avoids, I get sent in with a flashlight and a wrench. That's how I ended up at Hillside General Hospital, a carcass of a building that had been abandoned for decades. They told me the basement had been taking on water, maybe from a broken main. My job was to find the source, shut it off, and leave. I wasn't thrilled, but work is work. The hospital sat squatting on the edge of town, its windows black and cracked, ivy strangling the brick. I parked in a gravel lot overgrown with weeds and headed for the service entrance. The air smelled of mold, copper, and something faintly sour, like old laundry left wet for too long. Inside, the halls groaned with every step I took. My boots crunched over shattered glass and loose plaster. Signs still hung above doorways. Radiology, ICU, pediatrics, all leading nowhere now, just dust and ruin. I found the stairwell quickly, damp air wafting up from below. The further down I went, the colder it got. Water lapped faintly against the walls, echoing in the dark, and then I noticed something strange. An elevator at the far end of the basement corridor. Its doors were closed, but a faint glow bled from the cracks. I frowned. Elevators don't glow when the building hasn't had power in decades. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, maybe moonlight catching something reflective. Still, I walked toward it, water sloshing around my boots. The smell of rust thickened. Then I heard the bell. Ding. A perfect, clear elevator chime, cutting through the silence like it was brand new. I froze. My radio hissed static on my belt, though no one was on the line. The doors slid open with a soft shh. Inside, the cabin gleamed. Stainless steel walls polished to a mirror shine, floor tiles spotless. The fluorescent light overhead hummed steady and bright. It was like stepping back in time. But the panel caught my eye. Instead of numbers, the buttons were labeled with words: morgue, quarantine, long-term, sub-basement. Places I knew Hillside never had. I should have walked away. I should have turned and climbed those stairs back into the night. But curiosity is poison. It eats through caution until you can't resist. I stepped inside. The air was warm, humming faintly like the cabin was alive. The doors closed with a finality that made my stomach twist. The panel blinked, and one button lit up on its own: sub-basement. The elevator lurched, descending. The hum deepened into a groan. My ears popped like I was going down too far, deeper than any building should allow. Finally, the elevator stopped. The doors slid open, revealing a hallway bathed in greenish light. The walls weren't plaster or tile. They were concrete, wet and glistening, as though carved directly from the earth. I stepped out slowly, heart hammering. At the far end of the corridor, a second elevator door stood waiting. Its call button was already glowing red, and as I stared, I heard the bell again. Ding. Only this time, it came from right behind me. I turned, and the elevator I'd stepped out of was gone, leaving me stranded in a place that shouldn't exist at all. The hallway stretched ahead of me, long and narrow, the walls slick with condensation. I spun in panic. Where the elevator had been, there was now nothing but blank concrete, seamless and damp. No doors. No way back. My flashlight beam jittered across the floor. Water pooled in shallow dips, rippling faintly, as though stirred by something moving just out of sight. The air smelled metallic, sharp and sour, like a mix of rust and blood. The red glow of the second elevator button pulsed faintly at the far end. A heartbeat in the dark. I forced my legs forward, boots slapping wet concrete. Every step echoed back at me, but it wasn't just my footsteps I heard. There was a second set, lighter, quicker, keeping pace. "Hello?" I called, voice cracking. The echoes didn't answer, they just kept following. By the time I reached the second elevator, my throat was dry. I jabbed the call button. The red glow flared brighter, then dimmed. The air filled with a mechanical groan, gears grinding from deep below. The doors creaked open. Inside was another elevator cabin, identical to the one I'd ridden down, spotless, gleaming, too new for a building abandoned 40 years. But the panel was different. The buttons weren't labeled with floors this time. They were labeled with dates. Each button glowed faintly, waiting. I backed away, heart slamming in my chest. My radio hissed static, then snapped to life with a voice I didn't recognize. "You're late," it said, flat, hollow. "Patients are waiting." I dropped the radio, but the voice didn't stop. It was coming from the walls now, vibrating through the concrete. The water on the floor rippled harder, and then I saw them. Reflections. Dozens of them. My flashlight beam caught pale faces staring up from beneath the surface, mouths open in silent screams. They pressed against the water's skin from below, eyes wide, hands clawing upward as if the floor itself were a window holding them down. I stumbled back, boots splashing. The water was shallow, but the faces didn't vanish. They followed, turning with me, tracking every step. The elevator dinged. Ding. The button for 1952 lit up. The cabin waited, doors open like a mouth. I told myself not to step inside, to stay put, to wait until the nightmare passed. But the air around me thickened, humid and heavy, pressing against my chest. The whispers returned, dozens of voices overlapping. Down there. Next stop. You belong with us. The water rippled again. A hand broke the surface, skeletal fingers clawing for my boot. I yanked back just in time. Another hand followed, then another, pale arms pushing upward from beneath a floor that shouldn't have depth. I panicked. I lunged into the elevator. The doors slammed shut behind me. The cabin hummed, lights flickering. The 1952 button glowed brighter. My ears popped as the elevator began to descend again, though I hadn't touched anything. The panel blinked. The buttons shifted. They no longer showed dates. Now they showed names, and at the very bottom, glowing faintly, was mine. That was when I understood. The elevator wasn't taking me to another floor. It was taking me to the moment I'd been expected all along. The glow of my name on the panel made my stomach twist. It pulsed faintly, like it was alive, like it was waiting for me to accept. I slammed my fist against the doors, against the walls, screaming for them to open. They didn't budge. The cabin just hummed, descending deeper and deeper. The fluorescent light overhead flickered, buzzing like a trapped insect. When the elevator finally stopped, my ears popped so hard I nearly blacked out. The doors slid open with a hiss. What waited beyond wasn't a hospital hallway. It was a lobby, pristine. White tile floors polished to a mirror shine, potted plants in the corners, reception desk empty but spotless. No dust, no rot. Like the hospital had never closed. But there were no windows, no doors to the outside, just more elevators lining the far wall. Their call buttons glowed faint red, each one pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I stepped out, legs trembling. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, sharp and clean. Too clean. And then I heard it. The ding. One of the elevators opened. Doors parting slow. Inside stood a group of people in hospital gowns. Men, women, children. Their skin was pale, their veins dark beneath the surface. They stared at me in silence, heads tilting in eerie unison. My radio hissed on the floor of the cabin behind me. A voice whispered through the static. Join the others. The patients shuffled out, bare feet slapping against tile. Their mouths opened, all at once, but instead of voices, the sound of an elevator bell spilled out. Ding, ding, ding. I staggered backward until my shoulders hit the reception desk. The patients closed in, their eyes fixed on me, their faces slack and waiting. I panicked. I spun and bolted toward another elevator at the far wall, jabbing the button with frantic fingers. The doors slid open immediately, too fast, too eager. I stumbled inside. The panel blinked awake. More names scrolled across the buttons, hundreds of them, glowing faintly in sequence. Every few seconds, a new one appeared. And then I saw it. The last name added, still flickering into existence. Mine. Again. The elevator lurched downward. My knees buckled. The cabin shook like it was grinding through stone. My reflection stared back at me in the mirrored walls, warped and multiplied. For a moment, I saw myself in a hospital gown, eyes pale, lips moving to whisper the word, next. The doors opened once more. I expected another corridor, another lobby. Instead, I was looking back into the same basement corridor where this had started. The water lapped at the floor, faces pressing against the surface from below, eyes wide, mouths open, and behind me, the elevator bell chimed again. Ding. I turned. The panel was different now. Just one button. Continue. The glow from the button lit the cabin, pulsing brighter with each beat of my heart. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. But the light on the button didn't fade. It's still glowing now, because the elevator hasn't let me out. They say Hillside General is just a ruin, but I know the truth. The elevators still move, and once you ride them, They never let you stop. I'm an art student, and I've always been obsessed with murals. Not the clean stuff you see on city walls now, but the old ones. The crumbling works hidden in forgotten places, painted by hands no one remembers. They tell stories no textbook ever could. That's how I found myself at Brookhaven Children's Hospital, a place that had been abandoned since the late 1960s. Professors said the walls there had murals painted for the kids, bright animals, fairy tale forests, cartoon doctors with friendly smiles. A forgotten gallery in a place nobody wanted to visit. Everyone told me it was dangerous. The floors were rotting, the roof was half collapsed, and the whole building reeked of mold. But I wanted to see those paintings. I needed to. I went alone on a gray October morning. The front doors were chained, so I crawled in through a broken side window. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, thick with mildew. My flashlight beam caught peeling wallpaper and rusted cribs. For the first hour, it was what I expected. Empty hallways, broken toys, graffiti from kids who had dared each other to sneak inside. I almost convinced myself the hospital was just another ruin, until I reached the pediatric ward. The walls there were alive. Despite decades of neglect, the murals still clung to the plaster, bright and colorful. Cartoon rabbits held hands with smiling bears, trees bent under the weight of oversized apples, doctors in white coats waved cheerfully from painted doorways. I stood there in awe. The colors were wrong for the age, too vivid, too fresh, like they had been painted yesterday. I lifted my sketchbook, eager to capture them. But as I began to draw, I noticed something strange. The figures weren't static. The painted animals shifted when I wasn't looking. A bear's smile widened. A rabbit's ears twitched. The painted doctors turned their heads, just slightly, so their cartoon eyes followed me across the hall. I froze. My pencil snapped in my hand. It was just my imagination, I told myself. Tricks of light and shadow. But then I saw the children. They weren't graffiti. They weren't stains. They were part of the murals themselves. Dozens of kids, painted into the backgrounds. Some sat in hospital beds, smiling faintly. Others stood in forests, waving. Their faces were too detailed, too real, compared to the animals around them. And one of them looked exactly like a child I'd seen in an old yearbook during my research. I stepped closer, heart pounding. The paint was cracked, flaking. I reached out to touch it, just to prove it was real. My fingers brushed the surface. The child blinked. I jerked my hand back, stumbling. The painted boy's eyes followed me, his lips parting as if to speak. Then the other children stirred. One by one, their eyes opened in the murals. Tiny mouths stretched wide, shapes twisting under painted skin. The cartoon animals around them grinned wider, teeth sharp and wrong. I dropped my sketchbook and ran for the door. But when I reached the end of the hall, a new mural covered the wall, one that hadn't been there before. It was me, standing in the ward, sketchbook in hand. My face was pale, terrified, eyes wide. Painted children clung to my arms, dragging me down. That was when I realized the murals weren't just art. They were warnings, and I'd already been added to the canvas. I stumbled back from the mural of myself, heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The painted me stared in frozen terror, sketchbook clutched in trembling hands, while the children around him grinned with wide, too sharp mouths. It wasn't possible. I'd never posed like that. I hadn't even drawn anything worth keeping yet. And yet the mural captured every detail perfectly. My torn backpack strap, the ink stain on my thumb. I ran. The pediatric ward stretched longer than before. The murals twisting across every surface. Cartoon forests melted into hospital scenes, trees growing out of gurneys, bears with doctors' masks tending to painted children strapped to beds. Their eyes followed me, unblinking. Whispers rose behind the paint, soft, childlike, overlapping. Stay with us. You'll be happy here. Don't leave. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the voices weren't coming from outside. They were inside my head, seeping in like damp. At the end of the hall, I shoved through a set of double doors into what must have been the playroom. Toys lay scattered across the floor, wooden blocks, dolls missing eyes, a rocking horse sagging on one bent spring. The murals here were worse. The walls were covered floor to ceiling in drawings, crayon scrawls layered over paint, thick lines of red, black, and brown, stick figures with gaping mouths, houses burning, children with arms crossed out in jagged X's. In the corner, a mural showed a circle of kids holding hands. Their faces were smudged, blurred by age, or maybe smeared by something else. One figure stood outside the circle, sketched in fresher paint. Taller, an adult, me. My legs went weak. I stumbled to the rocking horse, gripping its mane like it might hold me steady. Its wooden head creaked as it turned, painted eyes staring directly into mine. The walls pulsed. The children in the crayon circle leaned closer, their blurred faces stretching, mouths twisting open. From those painted mouths, voices poured. You're ours now. You've been chosen. Finish the mural. I staggered backward, but the floor caught my boot. No, not the floor. My sketchbook. I must have dropped it earlier, but here it was again, lying open. New drawings filled the pages, not mine. Crude crayon sketches of me, standing in the ward, then in the playroom, then kneeling on the floor surrounded by painted children. The final page was blank except for faint outlines. The shape of a body, my body, unfinished. The whispers grew louder. Finish it, finish it. I snapped the sketchbook shut and ran. I didn't care where I went. Corridors blurred, doorways shifted. I found myself back in the ward, then in a stairwell that spiraled down endlessly. Murals coated every wall now, dripping wet, paint so fresh it smeared under my fingers when I brushed against it. Faces pressed from the walls, stretching the paint like skin. Their mouths opened, and the children's laughter rolled through the stairwell like thunder. I slammed into a landing door and burst through. Another ward. This one was smaller, lit faintly by shafts of daylight breaking through collapsed ceiling beams. Beds lined the walls, sheets rotting away. But what froze me were the murals above each bed. Children, painted in perfect detail, lying exactly where the bed stood. Their faces matched the stains in the mattresses, and on the bed closest to me, painted above it in perfect detail, was my own face, not terrified, not fighting, just lying still, eyes closed, hands folded across my chest, already finished. That was when I knew. I wasn't documenting the murals were documenting me. I froze at the foot of that bed, staring at the painted version of myself. It wasn't a rough sketch. It wasn't something half-finished. It was exact. Every detail was right. The torn backpack strap, the ink stain on my thumb, even the pale scar on my chin from when I was a kid. But there was one difference. The painted me was smiling, not a happy smile. A slack, empty grin, eyes closed as though I'd already accepted whatever came next. My stomach twisted. I backed away, whispering to myself, "No, no, this isn't me. This isn't real." But the mural didn't vanish, and when I turned, every other painting on the ward shifted. The children in the murals blinked awake. Their eyes rolled open one by one, glinting wetly in the dim light. Painted heads turned to follow me, mouths stretching too wide. "Lie down," they whispered, voices crawling from painted throats. "Be still. Join us." The air thickened, heavy with the scent of wet paint. I staggered toward the door, but the handles had been painted shut, literally painted. My fingers slid through layers of fresh pigment, tacky and warm, sealing me inside. The laughter began, high-pitched, childlike, rolling across the walls. The murals shifted, children peeling themselves from plaster, their painted hands stretching outward. Colors dripped off them in ribbons, spattering across the floor. One reached for me, its fingers streaking my arm in crimson and green. The paint burned cold where it touched, sinking into my skin like ink into paper. I screamed, clawing at the mark, but it was already spreading, veins turning the same oily colors. I stumbled back toward the bed, the one beneath the mural of myself. My legs gave out. I collapsed against the mattress, the springs groaning under my weight. The whispers grew louder. Lie still. Close your eyes. Smile. My vision blurred as the paint spread. I looked up at the ceiling, and there, above me, another mural was forming in real time. Brush strokes appeared on bare plaster, strokes that matched my position on the bed perfectly, my limbs, my face, the way I was lying. I thrashed, but the sheets coiled around my wrists like straps. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by wet paint flooding my throat. My arms sank into the mattress, my legs stiffened, the world dimming. The last thing I saw was the painted version of my own face, staring back at me from the ceiling. The smile widened, my eyes fluttered shut, and then there was nothing but stillness. They'll tell you Brookhaven is empty, just another ruin, another casualty of time. Professors will say the murals are folklore, that no real art survives like that, but they're wrong. The murals are alive. They grow, they change, they wait, and if anyone else comes looking, anyone foolish enough to step into that ward, they'll see me too, painted into the walls, smiling. I thought I was there to study forgotten art, but the truth is, the murals never needed me to observe them. They needed me to complete them. I was never supposed to see the inside of St. Luke's Hospital. Not like this. When I got the job as a night security guard, I thought it would be easy money. The place had been closed for decades, locked up after some outbreak in the 1950s that nobody in town liked to talk about. My shift was simple. Patrol the fenced perimeter, make sure no kids broke in, call it in if anything looked suspicious. The hospital itself was sealed. At least, that's what they told me. But on my third night, I found a door open. It was tucked at the back of the building, hidden behind overgrown shrubs. The padlock lay snapped on the ground, rusted through. I should have reported it. I should have called my supervisor. Instead, I told myself I'd just take a quick look. The air inside was heavy, stale. My flashlight beam swept across peeling walls and overturned gurneys. Dust swirled like ash with every step. I moved through the corridors, listening for raccoons or squatters. Instead, I found signs, handwritten, faded, taped crooked to the walls. Quarantine. Do not enter. Restricted isolation ward. My gut told me to turn around, but curiosity pulled me deeper. The hallways narrowed, the walls lined with rooms behind glass observation windows. Beds sat in neat rows, restraints still fastened. I expected emptiness, but when my flashlight hit the glass, my heart nearly stopped. Handprints smeared across the inside, hundreds of them. Some small, some large, all pressed hard into the foggy glass, as if clawing to get out. I stumbled back, the beam shaking. My radio hissed faintly. A voice whispered through the static, thin, brittle. "Help us." I froze. Nobody else was supposed to be inside. The hallway ended in a set of double doors marked Quarantine Wing. Something tugged at me, a pull I can't explain. Against every instinct, I pushed them open. Inside, the air was different, damp, rotting. The smell of mildew mixed with something sour like spoiled fruit. Rows of beds stretched out, but unlike the others, these weren't empty. Figures lay under the sheets. Still. Covered head to toe. My light caught the edge of one sheet. It rose, just slightly, breathing. I staggered back, boot hitting a metal tray. The crash echoed like thunder. The figures shifted under the sheets. Dozens of them, rising, falling, turning, and then, one by one, they began to sit up. The sheets clung to their faces, their arms, their torsos, shapes moving beneath the fabric like worms under skin. They turned toward me in unison, heads cocking at unnatural angles. My radio hissed again, louder this time. A chorus of voices bled through the static. "Stay with us! Quarantine never ends. You're one of us now." I dropped the flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor, landing on the far wall, where a mirror hung. And in that mirror I didn't see myself. I saw another figure under a sheet, already sitting up, already waiting. That was the moment I realized I hadn't walked into the quarantine wing, I'd been admitted to it. I snatched up the flashlight, beam trembling as it swept across the ward. The figures under the sheets hadn't moved again. They sat perfectly still now, heads tilted toward me. Their silence was worse than the whispers. I backed toward the doors, fumbling for the handle, but when I yanked, it didn't budge. The metal was cold, sealed tight, as if welded shut. My radio crackled. "Stay calm," a voice whispered. Not my supervisor, not anyone I knew. A voice flat, drained, like it had been speaking too long. "Don't spread it." "Spread what?" I shouted, panic scraping my throat. The radio hissed, then went silent. I turned back. The sheets on the beds rippled, slowly, deliberately. The beam caught one figure rising to its feet. The fabric clung to its form, stretching as though fused to its skin. It took one step, then another, moving toward me without sound. I stumbled backward, heart slamming against my ribs. The other figures followed, slipping from their beds, shuffling in unison. "Stay away," my voice cracked, useless in the stale air. They didn't stop. The nearest one reached out, sheet-covered fingers brushing my wrist. Cold shot through me, seeping into my bones. The glow from my flashlight flickered across the fabric, thin enough now to reveal something underneath. A face, not decayed, not monstrous, just sick. Hollow eyes, cracked lips, mouth opening and closing as if still trying to breathe. I shoved it away and bolted down the ward. My boots splashed through puddles, though I hadn't seen water before. The air grew thicker, humid, heavy with mildew. Doors lined the walls, marked with peeling paint. Isolation Room 1, Isolation Room 2. I grabbed a handle, yanking it open. Inside was a single bed. Straps lay across the mattress, buckles undone. But the walls were mirrors, floor to ceiling. Every reflection showed me strapped to the bed, a sheet pulled tight across my body. The mirror me twitched and struggled, hands clawing beneath the fabric. I slammed the door shut, breath ragged. The whispers followed me into the corridor. "Stay with us. Don't leave. Quarantine never ends." The lights flickered, buzzing louder. I turned and realized the sheeted figures weren't following anymore. They'd stopped, because they didn't need to. The ward itself was changing. The walls pulsed faintly, seams splitting to reveal fresh rows of beds. The smell of rot deepened, filling my lungs. Every new bed had a figure under the sheet, waiting. I ran again, desperate for any way out. At the end of the hall stood another set of double doors, this time with a sign above them, "Discharge." I slammed into them, shoulder first. They swung open with surprising ease. On the other side was a small office, desks, filing cabinets, a clock frozen at 3:17, and paperwork. Stacks of patient files spread across every surface. I grabbed the one closest to me, flipping it open. The name on the chart made my stomach lurch. It was mine. The notes were clinical, detached. Admitted with symptoms of infection. Observed agitation and disorientation. Quarantine extended indefinitely. The final entry was dated today. My radio crackled again. Same flat voice. "You've already been here." I dropped the file. My hands shook so hard I couldn't breathe. The sheeted figures were still out there in the ward, waiting. And I was starting to wonder if I'd already joined them. That was when it hit me. Maybe I wasn't patrolling a hospital at all. Maybe I was just pacing the walls of my own quarantine. I stood in that office, clutching my file, my breath shallow, hands trembling. My name scrawled across the top, today's date circled in red. I wanted to believe it was some cruel prank, maybe left by vandals, but the handwriting was neat, clinical, professional. The clock above the desk ticked once. I froze. It had been frozen at 3:17 a moment ago. Now it read 3:18. The second hand swept smoothly, steady. The hospital wasn't abandoned. It was alive. The whispers thickened in the hall. Footsteps shuffled closer. I grabbed another file at random, flipping through in desperation. Each name was familiar. My supervisor, the other guards, even my father, all marked with the same notes: admitted, quarantined, never discharged. The office door rattled. I shoved a filing cabinet against it, my pulse thundering. The metal groaned as the sheeted figures pressed against the other side, their voices blending into one awful drone. Stay, stay, stay. I scanned the office for another way out, a vent, a window, anything. My flashlight beam caught on another door, smaller, half hidden behind a shelf. I yanked it open and slipped through, slamming it behind me. The corridor beyond was narrow, lined with flickering lamps. Signs pointed in both directions. Observation to the left, treatment to the right. I chose right. The treatment wing reeked of chemicals, sharp enough to sting my eyes. Beds lined the walls, restraints dangling loose. But the worst part wasn't the beds. It was the sheets. Each one hung from the ceiling like curtains, suspended in rows. Pale fabric stretching from rafters to floor. Shapes shifted beneath them, bodies suspended upright, twitching, swaying as if underwater. I stumbled through, choking back bile. Their heads turned inside the fabric, following me. Hands pressed outward, flat against the cloth, brushing my shoulders as I passed. At the far end was a glass observation booth. Inside, a desk faced a wide window overlooking the ward. I stepped in, slamming the door behind me. On the desk was a tape recorder. The reels spun, though no one had pressed play. I leaned closer. The voice that crackled from it was my own. Subject displays agitation, paranoia, disorientation, refuses to accept status, recommend continued quarantine. My chest constricted. I backed into the glass. My reflection stared back, pale and hollow-eyed. For a moment, I thought the recorder was looping old audio, but then the voice spoke again, still mine, but fresh, alive. Subject now realizes he was never the guard. He has always been the patient. The recorder clicked off. I turned to the glass. The ward beyond was empty. No sheets, no bodies, just a single bed, and someone was lying in it. Me, strapped down, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. I pounded the glass, screaming. My reflection in the booth matched me, but the figure in the bed didn't move. A doctor in a hazmat suit stepped into the room, clipboard in hand. He didn't look at me. He looked at the me on the bed. "Patient remains unstable," he said. His voice was muffled, clinical. "Continue observation." The lights flickered. When they steadied, the booth around me was gone. I was the one strapped to the bed, sheet pulled tight across my body. And as I thrashed beneath it, a voice whispered in my ear. My own voice. "You were never guarding the quarantine wing. You've been quarantined all along." They told me I was watching an empty hospital. But the truth is worse, I was watching myself, and I never made it out. You've made it to the end. But the stories never really end, do they? If tonight's horrors left you unsettled, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It helps the darkness spread. I upload new nightmares every single day, so come back tomorrow for another episode you won't forget. Until then, keep the lights on and don't look behind you.